Westminster has once again been brought to a standstill as furious farmers drive their tractors through the streets of London, honking their horns, waving banners, and demanding to be heard. But this time, something feels different. The mood is shifting. The anger is no longer confined to the farming community alone. The messages on the banners tell a new story, one of a nation fed up with a government that refuses to listen. It's no longer just about inheritance tax. This is turning into something much bigger. Gawain Towler, the former Reform UK spokesman, has seen the warning signs. Speaking to GB News, he doesn't mince his words. "If I were Keir Starmer, I'd be very worried. That's because this isn't just a single protest anymore. It's a growing movement of discontent. A government can ignore one group, but what happens when that group starts joining forces with others? What happens when the anger spreads beyond farmers to pensioners struggling with winter fuel allowance, to working families crushed by rising costs, to small business owners drowning in taxes? Starmer and Reeves might think they can ride this out, but the protests are only getting louder. Farmers, once thought of as a quiet, hard-working sector that just got on with things, are proving they're anything but silent when pushed to the brink. This is their third trip to Westminster in their tractors, and they're not coming for a polite conversation. They're demanding action, and still, Labour refuses to engage. Still, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, stays silent. James Fairley, one of the farmers leading the charge, isn't surprised. He's watched as the government buries its head in the sand. He's heard the empty promises, and now he's calling them out. "Rachel from accounts," he scoffs, mocking the Chancellor. "She's just not listening." He knows the stakes, he knows the damage being done, and he knows that the government either doesn't understand or doesn't care. There's a growing feeling among the farming community that this fight will take longer than Labour will last in office. The belief isn't that the government will change its mind. The belief is that farmers just need to outlast them, because the way things are going, the cracks are beginning to show. The anger isn't going away, and sooner or later, Labour will be forced to face the consequences of their choices. What's making this protest different from the previous ones is the realisation that the fight isn't just against Labour, it's against a system that's rigged against them. Fairley points out how even major supermarket chains are playing both sides, pretending to support the farmers in public, but quietly working to block their protests in private. Legal action has been taken to prevent any disruption to supply chains, meaning that if farmers try to hit back where it hurts, the food distribution network, they could be arrested. The illusion of support is just that, an illusion, and so their hands are tied. If they escalate, they risk losing public support. If they don't, they risk being ignored. It's a calculated game, and Labour is banking on them giving up. But that's not going to happen, because these protests are only growing, and if the government thinks farmers will just quietly return to their fields and accept their fate, they're making a grave mistake. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, a different kind of political firestorm is brewing. In a heated debate, Reform MP Rupert Lowe has just delivered one of the most brutal takedowns of Labour's immigration policies seen in years. Faced with Labour MP Barry Gardner's repeated claims that migration has always benefited the economy, Lowe does not hold back. "You're deluded," he fires. "If you really think this is good for the country, let them live in your house." The debate is fierce. Gardner attempts to defend his stance, listing waves of migrants who have contributed to British society over the decades. But Lowe isn't buying it. He points to the new reality, the record-breaking arrests of illegal workers, the overcrowding, the system collapsing under the pressure. If they're fleeing from war, where are the women and children, he demands. It's a question Labour refuses to answer. The numbers don't lie. Over 600 illegal workers were arrested in January 2025 alone, the highest number ever recorded. Workplace raids have surged. Small businesses are being exposed for employing illegal migrants who are often found working in horrific conditions for next to no pay. But the real scandal? Many of these migrants are now believed to have come through the Channel crossings, something Labour has repeatedly downplayed. The Labour Party is in a difficult position. On one hand, they want to appear tough on illegal migration to win back the Red Wall voters they lost in 2019. On the other hand, their own MPs are still pushing the same tired pro-migration arguments that are alienating voters even further. It's a disaster of their own making. With Reform surging in the polls and Labour facing mounting pressure from all sides, it's no surprise that cracks are beginning to show. Farmers are rising, the public is waking up, immigration is once again at the centre of national debate, and Labour, they're scrambling. Keir Starmer hoped to glide through his first year in government with ease. Instead, he's walking straight into a political inferno, and the biggest problem of all, this isn't going away. The protests will continue, the anger will spread, and before long, Starmer will have to face a reality he's been trying to ignore. The people have had enough. The streets of Westminster are no longer just a political stage, they are a battlefield. The sound of revving engines and honking horns echoes through the corridors of power as a sea of tractors once again storms the capital. But this time, the farmers aren't alone. Banners waving from the vehicles don't just read "No farmers, no food" anymore. Instead, messages of frustration stretch across the streets. Complaints about net zero policies, fuel fuel costs, inheritance tax, and the relentless government squeeze on working-class families. What started as a protest against one specific policy has transformed into something much more dangerous for Keir Starmer's Labour government, a movement. Gawain Towler, former Reform UK spokesman, has seen enough political battles to recognise what's happening. He delivers a chilling warning to Starmer and Chancellor Rachel Reeves. "If I were them, I'd be very worried, because what Labour is facing isn't just an angry farming community, it's the slow but unstoppable rise of a new opposition, one that doesn't play by Westminster's rules. For months, the government has dismissed the protests, hoping they would fizzle out. They assumed farmers would accept their fate, that anger would die down, that media coverage would move on. Instead, the fury has only grown. The more Labour ignores them, the stronger they become. This is not a minor inconvenience anymore, it's an uprising." James Fairley, one of the key voices in the movement, lays it out clearly. "They're not listening," he says, frustration etched into every word. Rachel from accounts has no idea what she's messing with. The nickname, dripping with disdain, is spreading like wildfire among protesters. It's more than just an insult, it's a symbol of the belief that the people running the country are nothing more than detached bureaucrats, shuffling papers while livelihoods collapse. And the government's response? Silence. A refusal to engage. Reeves and Starmer, terrified of making a U-turn, are digging in their heels. But in doing so, they're making a critical mistake. The farmers are not backing down. They don't care about political games. This is their survival. Behind the scenes, however, the system is already moving against them. Major supermarket chains, who publicly claim to support farmers, are secretly working to block their protests. Supply chain disruptions, the one major weapon that could force real change, are being shut down by legal threats. If farmers try to block distribution, they could face immediate arrest. It's a classic political maneuver, corporations pretending to stand with the people while quietly siding with the government. But the farmers see through it, and more importantly, so does the public. Away from the fields and tractors, another political war is exploding. Reform MP Rupert Lowe has just destroyed Labour MP Barry Gardiner in one of the most brutal takedowns seen in recent political debates. Gardiner, repeating the same tired talking points, insists that migration has always benefited the economy. Lowe, unfazed, fires back. "You're deluded," he says, cutting through the nonsense. "If this is so great, let them live in your house." It's a mic drop moment. Gardiner stammers, trying to recover, but the damage is done. The message is simple. Labour pushes mass migration, but they don't live with the consequences. The British people do, and the numbers back it up. Illegal migration is out of control. Over 600 illegal workers were arrested in January 2025 alone, the highest ever recorded. Workplace raids have exploded. Businesses across the country, nail bars, convenience stores, restaurants, are being exposed for employing migrants under horrific conditions, and shockingly, many of these workers arrived via the Channel crossings, something Labour has repeatedly denied would happen. The government is in panic mode. Red Wall Labour MPs, terrified of losing their seats, are privately begging Starmer to take a tougher stance. But will he, or is he too scared of upsetting his globalist donors? Meanwhile, public anger is rising. Farmers are shutting down cities. The cost of living keeps spiralling out of control. Illegal migration is at record levels. And Labour's answer? Silence. Keir Starmer came into power hoping for an easy ride.